Welcome to a special holiday episode of the Vancouver Life Real Estate Podcast. First off, we are here to show some gratitude. This channel just hit 5,000 subscribers. It actually hit that number on Christmas Day, kind of a nice little surprise present here. And, the channel has doubled in size in 2024, and we are here to say thank you so much to everyone who's ever watched an episode, shared a video, and of course, to everyone who has subscribed. It really does mean the world to us. It's such a niche channel, and to have reached this milestone, we have all of you to thank for that. And as we go into 2025, we are dedicated to improving our channel and making it, really quality and just have a ton of value and just a ton of great insights. And of course, a bunch of fantastic interviews and a number of ones that we already have booked that we are super, super excited to share with you. We, of course, really appreciate all your feedback and engaging in an open dialogue in the comment section about Vancouver real estate and basically all the challenges it also presents. And remember, of course, if you ever want to talk to us one-on-one, we'd love to connect. Just click on the Calendly link below and select a time and date that works for you, and we will talk real estate. So this episode is all about kind of a retrospective on 2024 and looking back at what happened in the real estate market. Ultimately, I think the core theme last year was the year of housing promises from basically multiple levels of government that they all felt the need to tinker with real estate and the rules and the policies, and everything they presented ultimately fell flat. Right? This was the year, for example, that Trudeau announced an additional 3.9 million homes that they were going to build by the year 2031. Only to basically see the remainder of the year produce a record high number of real estate insolvencies, developers that were going into foreclosure, and housing starts ultimately started trending downwards almost immediately after that announcement. And that kind of summarizes the real estate theme of 2024. While there is often great intent with these initiatives, it's the execution where we repeatedly see things fall flat. Now, we're going to recap some of the other major real estate announcements from this year, as there were what felt like an elevated amount of them. And let's start with one of the largest being Bill 44, or the Small Scale Multi-Unit Housing Initiative, or even multiplex, whatever you want to call it. This was a provincial initiative that was created to ultimately kind of force the cities within our province to densify by rezoning single-family home lots to allow for multiple units to be built on it. This was done, of course, because the cities weren't doing it themselves. The rate of growth in housing on a municipal level was too slow, and the province felt the need to step in and ultimately force this policy down their throat, in a sense. And it's big, right? This is the largest rezoning policy that we'll probably ever see in our lifetimes. And again, here we demonstrate what happens when the second tier of government gets involved. Some municipalities, some cities like Burnaby, of course, adopted it to the sort of umpteenth degree, whereas other areas like West Van, for example, did a complete pushback and said, look, we're not even going to consider this for another year, right? They kind of deferred it. The other cities that also did adopt it, well, guess what? They kind of cranked up their fees. And what's the result of that? You've got sort of one level forcing densification, the other one saying, okay, but, right? We're going to create more homes, but they're not going to be affordable homes. We see it time and again, right? It's just like you can't give an inch without getting a mile kind of thing. You get one step forward and then two steps back. It's really frustrating. And I can understand how governments are frustrated with each other at it, right? They either say they'll kind of do it or they'll just squeeze people for a little bit more money. Either way, it is starting to happen, right? In Vancouver, apparently, there's been about 280 development permits submitted for multiplex. So we were told, but guess what? It's actually bigger than that. There's a backlog. There's been over 600 that have been submitted. So again, now we're seeing the people trying to bring houses to market, builders bringing homes to market. And then where's the bottleneck? Well, it's at a level of government being currently, the permitting office, at City Hall. We'll dive into that more, of course, in the new year. But either way, the first building and permits have been approved, and there are projects, multiplex projects, that have begun construction, but they have begun. And it'll be very interesting to see how multiplexes are essentially accepted, right? Are people going to want to buy these types of homes that are going into these neighborhoods? And it'll be fun to watch it from city to city to city. And of course, how they ultimately start to reshape the housing landscape across the greater Vancouver Regional District.
When we look at Bill 44, I think it also is like a metaphor for how the federal government doesn't talk to the provincial government, who barely speaks to the municipal government. And, when you have 1.2 million people that we bring into the country, and then you go, we don't have enough housing for you guys. Let's blanket this. Whoop. Right. You're just seeing it's just all these band-aids. There's no real thought out plan here. And I guess that's a real problem with jurisdictions and each province wanting their own thing. But ultimately, it's I think a great solution. It does create a different set of problems. But that said, it'll be really interesting, like you said, Dan, to see how this unfolds. But I don't think it really changes the political landscape, which this kind of shows. This policy, which is meant to help, really kind of spotlighted the problems at the different federal, municipal, and provincial levels of government. Speaking to this a little bit more, and kind of comically, as you mentioned earlier, Trudeau promised to build 3.9 million homes. And he was largely going to initiate that through the Housing Accelerator Fund. This fund was launched by the feds. It was a $4 billion initiative aimed at increasing housing supply by incentivizing municipalities to implement pro-housing policies. According to the CMHC, as of December 2024, the Housing Accelerator Fund apparently has assisted 177 communities across Canada in their efforts to help boost housing supply, though the actual housing supply numbers are incredibly murky, to the point where they don't even release how many homes have been built, because I don't think any have. While the exact number of those homes remains unknown, the fund has come out and said they have facilitated agreements, and I'm going to quote this, expected to result in a whopping 21,000 new homes in the next 3 years. What a failure, if you ask me. I'm not sure we'll see this program survive, especially as we head into 2025. There's a lot of looming political instability, and it's about time, I think, where we see less promises and more action. So I'd love to see that. Lastly, I think just with all of these new things like the federal government has introduced and the provincial government continues, it's always these new programs. It would be really cool to go into 2025 seeing maybe less programs and just better execution of the things we already have in place, instead of always trying to fix things instantly or with a instant reaction. We need to think about these things. They're long-term problems that need long-term solutions and commitments to them.
Yeah, well put. And another organization we saw try to help with affordable housing is, of course, the CMHC. And it's almost every year we see some form of the mortgage rules change a bit by the CMHC, right? They got to tinker just a bit with an intent, of course, to try and make housing more affordable, or, well, maybe just the accessibility to buy a less affordable home, which we kind of saw this year, right? I mean, it was very recently enacted, but this was the year where CMHC increased the insured mortgage limit from 1 million to 1.5 million. A huge jump that caught a lot of people off guard, because even the banks weren't asking for that. They were asking for 1.25 million, yet there was this huge jump by 50%. And so, of course, this doesn't make homes more affordable, right? It makes it achievable or more achievable to buy more expensive homes. So instead of kind of removing taxes, they're really just allowing Canadians to take on more debt, right? You get the bigger mortgage, and they've also allowed people to amortize from 25 to 30 years. So yes, it will help a small segment of the population get into a house that they may not have otherwise. But again, when you're looking at a 95 to 98% loan to value debt ratio, it's not helping that much, at least not long term. But again, all case by case. Either way, they tinkered as well in 2024.
I'm pretty sure Canada has the highest debt to GDP ratio of any G7 nation, and we've just increased it by another 33%. And so I think this is wholly irresponsible. I think it's reflective of Trudeau's blowing past the budget guardrails that he put on, and then looking at also at our provincial one, which is, the biggest deficit we've ever seen. It's all in line with more and more debt, more and more money printing, less and less ways that we actually service this debt, where we actually create prosperity is just more debt. It's kind of scary. And speaking to more of these policies here, we had the anti-flipping tax that was announced in 2024 and is soon to go into play here in January of 2025. So just a quick summary of what that was. Basically, we had the provincial government come out and say it was those nasty investors and home flippers that were causing all of the prices to increase throughout the Lower Mainland. And just so how that tax works, if next year, if you renovate a property and then you decide to sell it in the same year, you're going to pay 20% on your flip. Then if you sell it in year 2, you'll spend 10%. And then eventually it goes down to no tax. But Stats Can released a report this year, which I think everyone here should be very in tune with. And it looked at the data from 2019 to 2021. Furthermore, how can you make decisions around housing policy when you don't have the data and it came out this year? That's a whole nother conversation. But what that data looked at was the busiest markets we've ever experienced going through 2021, where we had basically free money. And a little over 3% of the property that was purchased and sold happened to be within the same year or quote unquote flipped. Stats Can also reported that gross profits flipped for these homes were about 15 to 20%. That's gross profit. So that doesn't account for renovation costs, financing costs, property transfer tax, selling fees. So the margins that were made on those 15 to 20 points would be largely eroded. So the other thing that the report noted, and this is super important to understand, was that in 2021, prices here in BC ripped on average by 18%. And flipped homes sold at 20%. So they sold for 2% more than what the market was bearing for your average home that wasn't renovated. So instead of looking at why prices rose by 18%, we're taking a magnifying glass to the 2%. This is so indicative of not paying attention to the elephant in the room. And political wisdom would tell you that, this new policy will stop prices from climbing, which is laughable when in reality, it restricts supply of renovated properties going to the market for 2 years. Buyers won't pay an additional 20%, and sellers won't take less. They won't take 20% on a renovated property. So no selling is going to happen, and you'll have more demand chasing fewer goods, which will push prices up, all in the name of affordability. Anyhow, what we're seeing here, I think, in 2024 is, just all of these symptoms coming out of, really poor planning over the last 30 years in the housing sector.
So yes, all very true, right? And it comes across as like a diversion tactic. The more they point the fingers at the foreign investor, the flipper, the vacant homes, the speculators, all this stuff, it just gives people fodder to not think about the fact that it's largely an internal problem being in the governments. But again, we touch on this a lot.
Think about this, Dan. Just one last point. If you look at all the new property that's been built, all of the government fees at the municipal level, provincial level, property transfer tax fees, and then GST as well, all of that baked into new prices of homes. So here they're saying, well, we're going to charge you 20% if you put a home back on the market that wouldn't have GST or some of these additional taxes put into it, which would allow you to buy a home which would be arguably less expensive than a new one. But by doing this, this pushes the prices up to the same as a new property, so they're collecting their tax either way. They're not making property more affordable for anyone.
Great way of looking at it, and all too true. It's a bit frustrating when you put it in that lens, isn't it? Okay, let's talk rate cuts now, because this year, 2024, was the first time that we saw the Bank of Canada cut rates in over 4 years. And understandably, of course, interest rates are one of the largest factors when it comes to housing, both for sales, but also for construction, right? When there's high rates, builders can't build, and we've seen that over the last couple of years. And now with rates forecasted to continue dropping in 2025, it could be the catalyst to get the housing market moving again, both on the sales volume level and on the construction level. Though again, I think this is going to maybe just resuscitate it a bit and bring it back to life. Do not expect any type of raging bull market in 2025, at least not based on the current data that we have.
Totally agree. All right, let's have a look at the pre-sale market. Just a quick note on this. This area of the industry really took a battering in 2024. Developers, I think the story around here is that they largely struggled if they didn't go out of business. There wasn't really any stories of developers knocking stuff out of the park, not in 2024 or in 2023 for that fact. And when I look at some of the stats here, there were thousands of homes in BC that were shelved and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that went into receivership because the province decided or the municipalities decided to change the tax situation, or on top of that, developers were cross-collateralized and you saw interest rates kill them as a result of this because they accelerated so quickly. In fact, according to the Federal Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, there were over 500 bankruptcies and proposals in the real estate, rental, leasing, and construction sector under the Insolvency Act in Q2 and Q3 of 2024, compared to 397 in 2023. That's an increase of 36% in just those 2 quarters, and we wonder why building permits are at all-time lows in this country. I don't think developers want to come here. We haven't created an environment for them to thrive in. And as such, it's going to make the problems worse for us later down the road.
Another element that has been on the top of people's minds for at least the last 3 or 4 years is inflation. And it was actually over 2.5 years ago that inflation peaked here in Canada. And to me, it feels like that was a lot more recent. But here's another fact I found surprising. Inflation has been under 3% all year. All of 2024, it's been under 3%. We'll dive deeper into our predictions about inflation, of course, in our predictions episode coming in a couple of weeks. But for now, for today, if we take a snapshot, inflation is technically where the BOC intends for it to be. Now, of course, the challenge becomes maintaining it under both a Trump presidency and a falling Canadian dollar, which is ultimately going to mean we're going to start importing a bit of inflation. So one to watch in 25 for sure.
Pay attention there. Airbnb ban. I mean, this basically destroyed Kelowna's summer tourist market. It absolutely decimated it. We saw hotels gouge more than ever with record-setting hotel rates during things like the Taylor Swift concerts and people renting their own places as a result of that. Again, I think this policy change, this shift, really just came down to pointing fingers at people who were trying to look after their retirement, who were trying to take advantage of the laws that existed in front of them and had done for a long time. And now we've got the government that has taken those things away, blames the private sector for it, when truly it's a result of their own policy decisions. Like I've said so many times, I sound like a broken record, over the last few decades, which have led to us having to do things like this in order to create a perceived sense of equality in the housing market.
It's amazing to see, again, all these little changes, these tinkerings, these pointing the fingers, right? Oh yeah, it was the Airbnb rentals that caused homes to be unaffordable. And here's another year with all these changes, and yet year over year, prices are going to end up almost identical to where they were. So nothing that was done here provincially has improved housing prices. Now, I know housing is a slow-moving market and things take time, but they've been tinkering forever. And every time they tinker, well, year over year, I mean, look, where are prices compared to where they were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? You get where this is going. Either way, prices have not come off in our region, even after all these implemented policies and whatnot. And let's talk about more. What about the rental market? Because the RTB sure put their finger in the pie this year as well. And remember when they took the notice to tenants about a vacant tenancy when somebody bought the home and it was tenanted and they wanted to move in, they had to give previously 2 months full 2 months notice to be able to move into a vacant property. The RTB decided to not consult with the real estate industry and just double that to 4 months and think everything would be fine. Well, of course it wasn't. And there was all sorts of issues that arose there. And I guess they decided to meet in the middle there with a 3-month notice now in place, which again, still causes a lot of issues and has some buyers not even ever considering buying a rented property because of the potential issues that are created there. They also mentioned this year that the new rental rate increase, right? If you are a landlord in 2025, you can increase your rental rate by 3%. And in 2024, it was 3.5%. And I can tell you something, both of those amounts are less than the annual inflation rate, making a mom and pop or any landlord or housing provider not being able to really cover their expenses to the amount that they have to be able to increase their rent. So understandably, between limited or sort of throttled rental rate increases, flipping taxes, Airbnb bans, these RTB changes, and all these policies as far as the RTB goes, heavily favoring the tenants. I mean, we're seeing fewer and fewer sort of mom and pop investors going into this space. I mean, people are selling off their rental units saying it's not worth it, or even worse, they're living in a suited house and they refuse to rent out their suite because all of the nightmare issues at the RTB. And apparently there's thousands and thousands of them out there. We did an interview earlier this year that touched on that. And so you could just imagine, we're saying we have not enough housing, but again, it's poor policy that is preventing from people literally opening their doors to vacant units that exist today.
It's crazy too, especially when the government gives themselves an increase in their income by, more than 20% the provincial level, and yet they don't allow other people. They recognize it for themselves, but they don't recognize it for the people they work for. It kind of blows my mind. Anyways, let's have a look at some of the government changes that went through 2024. Obviously, most recently, Chrystia Freeland left her post. Sean Fraser quit as well. The BC Conservative Party actually gained and gave the BC NDP a real run for its money this year. I believe they lost out by 2 seats, whereas last year they didn't even have a seat. So quite a shift in perspective, quite a shift in terms of, I think, what people are seeing happening, not just here, but around Canada and around North America largely. The likelihood of Trudeau being replaced in 2025, I think, is enormous. If not by his own party, then certainly through a general election. I just don't think the policies, the lip service that he's given, and certainly the execution has led Canada to a much tougher place than when he took over back in 2015. We've had 9 years, and I think it's long enough. I see it as time for change, but we'll see what everybody else thinks. What's more, too, is we're heading into a unstable environment with respect to Trump down south. Unstable in the sense of what's it going to do to our economy. I think largely we understand what his effects are like, the kind of pressure he's going to put on elected officials, central banks, things like that. He's a wild card, and I think if the government is going to be effective around Trump, we need to have leadership that can also deal with someone like Trump.
2025, I mean, it's setting up to be, well, a very interesting year, unquestionably, and definitely one for the books. So that was our retrospective. That's what happened in 24, more or less, when it comes to all the policy changes and whatnot. Yes, there were others, but those were the main ones that really attempted to move the needle with Canadian and BC housing. Coming up for you next week, the December stats are out, and a little sneak preview. Median prices are up for the 3rd straight month, something that we will expand on. And we're also going to do a double header, I guess, because we're going to do our 2024 predictions review, right? Which ones were we right? Which ones were we way wrong on? These are always fun to look back and see what we kind of thought was going to happen in the year and how it all panned out. Then the week after that, on January 11th, is our 2025 Vancouver real estate predictions. Again, always a fun episode, and we look forward to sharing what we think is going to happen there. Thank you again so much for helping us hit 5,000 subscribers. It's a fantastic milestone, and we are humbled to be able to achieve that thanks to you. Happy New Year to you all, and we will see you in 2025.